some of them have decided not to run for re-election anymore. I believe that to be true. And that we have gained a lot of ground with retiring some of those people.
I mean, to Mrs. Fleming's point, the question was, kind of the history of what's happened to the supporters of Speaker Strauss. Over the past 2 cycles, no one who takes a public position in opposition to Joe Strauss has lost an election. No one. No one. No one has lost an election who has opposed Joe Strauss. No one. Okay. No one. Anywhere. At all. On the other hand, the supporters of Joe Strauss, they have lost through retirement at the ballot box, something like going on a dozen House members, folks who stood with Joe Strauss and found themselves defeated as a result of it. And the closer you came, the more likely you are to fail. And it's been rather very peculiar. Look, in every self-defense class and things I've taken over the years, this message always ends up coming through. That watch what your enemy attacks, because that's their weak spot. That's number one. Number two is that when attacked, people can always be counted on to protect themselves first. Okay. So this past cycle, we saw something very exciting. Actually, past 2 cycles, we saw something very exciting happen. There was an opponent to Joe Strauss 2 years ago, in the last primary 2 years ago. And who spent something like $110,000, $115,000. So spent nothing, no money. I mean, just a very small amount of money in politics. Strauss spent $1 million on himself. Okay, that was money that couldn't go elsewhere. And so guess what happened? A good number of his friends ended up losing election. He protected himself rather than protecting them. The same thing happened again this cycle. A couple of Strauss's close folks were protected. 6 of them ended up losing. Jim Kepler, Eastland, Texas, probably one of the closest guys to Strauss. Kepler had a very strong challenge, got him very close to winning. I think he's going to run again. Kepler not only spent out his campaign war chest approaching $1 million, he also had all the lobby come in and work the polls for him and all these things. People who could have gone to other places, but because he sucked them to himself, these other folks lost. So the Strauss team, when you talk to lawmakers who say, well, I'm going to need them to protect me, the question you kind of have to ask them is, really? Are they really going to protect you? Can you show me evidence that they can protect you? Because they couldn't protect the guys who are ideologically aligned with them, who they really would rather have in the legislature. What the blazes makes you think they're going to do anything other than pat you on the head and say, "Via con Dios"? I mean, I think that's the it's a very practical political question. So we've had 6 defeats of Strauss guys in this cycle. Another 20 retired this year. They retired. Many of them actually said, in various ways, I don't want the challenge. I know I'm going to get challenged, and I just don't have the fight left in me. So they went away. A lot of those seats were then filled by conservatives, by real honest-to-goodness conservatives. So, the numbers have gotten better. We have built better numbers of real constitutional conservatives in the Texas House. The problem, though, has just been that because you and I aren't showing up the day after the election like we do the days before an election, those folks start feeling fearful of the lobby rather than of the people. They start wanting to gain the approval of the Austin Un-American Socialist newspaper. They start wanting to be invited to the cool lobby hangouts and to have the nice dinners, and their spouses want to be invited to the cool Christmas parties and all those kind of things because you and I aren't showing up. So I'd suggest that's where showing up matters. Questions? Yes, ma'am.
Got him.
Oh, uh-oh. That's bad.
My Am I on now? So the party's at your house all year, right?
Yes.
Okay. Can you name some specific House members who should be particularly targeted for persuasion regarding the Strauss-Turner race?
Dan Flynn.
Yeah, I think that's, in your neighborhood, I would absolutely say Dan Flynn. Dan Flynn's a guy who, has always been thought of as a conservative. His record kind of slipped this past session. I think in large part because, he was suddenly sitting at the table with he was sitting in the same room with the cool kids. They had him at the little kids' table, but at least he was in the room with them there. He was at the folding card table with the paper plates instead of the china, but he could at least hear the jokes that were being told, and so his record, because he didn't want to lose that. His record kind of slipped by all the different conservative votes because he started having to vote with the Strauss team because he was on their team. In his heart, I think Dan Flynn is conservative. I think that he's kind of lost his way, and I'll tell you, as evidence of his lost way, remember, he came out loud, proud, and strong to keep the second most liberal Republican in the Texas Senate, Bob Dewar. And his home county went 60-40 for the next state senator, Bob Hall. So Dan Flynn has lost touch. And just because look, I've lots of friends I've lost touch with over the years and didn't get back in touch. Right? People can be, they can be reclaimed. And I think having that first conversation, like he's going to be a state rep, period, in January, February, March, April, May. He's going to be a state rep. So, make the effort to reclaim him. But he should probably also know that 60% of his constituents voted for the other guy in that state Senate race, and that might inspire people to run against him next time. That should be politically troubling to him. Give him a practical reason to do the right thing first, a political reason. A couple others, Larry Phillips, who's kind of up to the north of you. Someone else who is very much on the Strauss team. Larry Phillips wants to run for state Senate at some point soon. That would be against Craig Estes, who's from Wichita Falls, so kind of weird geography. But there's some guys like that who should be targeted. There are some of our firebrand conservatives from last time, like Ron Simmons and Giovanni Capriglione, have started flirting with, maybe we just want to be on the winning team. They're getting word awards. They should probably be told, no, look, you said you were conservative, act like one. And a lot of it is very irrational. I'm going to go back to it. A lot of it is very irrational because there is zero evidence that standing with Joe Strauss does anything other than harm your integrity, in the case of Dan Flynn, or harm your political future, as in the case of 25 some odd folks. So don't do it. But they have this irrational, I've got to be with them or else I'll get in trouble. Well, I don't think so. Let me know, just to close the circle. Look who was promoted to statewide office this time. You had a bunch of guys who weren't Strauss guys. You had a bunch of Strauss guys seeking statewide office. Maybe the closest thing to Joe Strauss on a statewide actual ballot, not a poll, but on the ballot, was Dan Branch. Dan Branch and Joe Strauss have been friends since they were little kids. They are ideologically inseparable. Branch is a little more marketable in the sense he's just a little more personable and that sort of thing than Strauss. Both very wealthy families on down the line. They're almost identical to each other. If Joe Strauss had bigger eyebrows, they would have been identical twins probably. Voters had the opportunity to look at the record statewide of Joe Strauss in the form of Dan Branch, and they found it lacking to the extent that Dan Branch lost 60-40, 64-36 or whatever, I can't remember the final number. So that should be telling to a lot of these guys that the closest to it, Harvey Hildebrand, lost, didn't even make the runoff for comptroller. Eric Opiella and Tommy Merritt, y'all Texas. I miss Tommy Merritt because he was just so laughable. But anyway, thank goodness he's not ag commissioner. Eric Opiello was Strauss's lawyer, and Tommy Merritt, they're in the inner circle of the Team Strauss. Neither one of them got to be ag commissioner. They both ran against similar people. So, I think that there's a whole lot of evidence that also points to the fact that, not only are you in danger of not retaining your House seat, but you're going to not have the opportunity to advance. Maybe someone can say, oh, I don't want to advance. Bull. Anyone who puts their name on a ballot wants the next space up on the ballot. Every member, except for maybe Mr. Schaefer, every member who, and we'll talk about that later, every member of the Texas House, almost every member, gets up in the morning, looks in the mirror, and says, good morning, Mr. President. That's who a lot of these folks are. There's nothing wrong, there's nothing wrong with ambition. Everyone wants to get a pay raise. Everyone wants to get a promotion at work, so there's nothing wrong with that. And so we have to appeal to them and say, if you want to move up, look who has and hasn't been moving up. Dan Flynn, Larry Phillips, Ron Simmons, Giovanni Capriglione. Those are 4 names I'd give you off the top of my head.
Because we ask all the questions, I want everybody to see this is a blank card that we hold up when we walk around. I don't want you to think I'm not asking a question.
I thought you were going to ask me a blank question.
We know the party's at your house. Just tell us when so we can help. The first Tuesday of January is the time to stop Strauss. Contact our representatives prior to this.
You should be talking to your state rep immediately.
Hi, man.
And you should be encouraging everyone on your Christmas card list to be doing likewise. Everyone you went to high school with. The guy from across the street who you're not sure where he went, get on Google and Facebook and find him and get him to also make, this is the time to, and in the same way, this is the time to be talking to him about property taxes and every other issue. This is the time. There is not ever a time to not be talking about your elected officials, about legislative leadership, about policy outcomes, about policy problems. You and I have to be constantly engaged, but for the purpose of the hiring and firing of lawmakers, for the purpose of accountability. I would argue it is very important for each one of us to have, to set clear markers in advance of the work starting of what we expect. When you build a house, you tell the contractor, I want it by this date, I want the walls to have these colors, I want the floor to have this kind of carpeting, I want it to be level, I want it to not leak, all these kind of things that I expect of you. And if it's not, guess what you won't be getting? You won't be getting the bonus, you won't be getting the paycheck, I'm gonna file a lawsuit against you. All these kind of the quid pro quos, getting things done. Well, you have to have the same conversation with your legislator, what you expect and what you individually are going to be rehiring or firing based around.
Is there a tactically strong group of legislators organized and ready to beat Joe Strauss?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I'm sorry, Emma.
Is there a tactically strong group of legislators organized and ready to beat Joe Strauss?
That's a question you'd have to talk to some of the legislators more about. Like any election, no one is supposed to win an election when they file for the seat. There's this, the idea is, when Matt Schaefer put his name on the ballot, everyone went until about 9 p.m. the night the votes were counted. They went, So, that's kind of the way of every election. And every candidate has to go about the diligence, regardless of what we're running for, state rep or dog catcher or city council or speaker or whatever. You got to surround yourself with advisors, with tacticians, with strategists, with vendors and everything else. And look, I would encourage each one of you to have the conversation with your state rep, call up Scott Turner, call up whoever, and say, hey, I want to be in the fight. Put me in, coach, ready to play. I think that the team that develops around Scott Turner is whatever is going to be whoever steps up to volunteer.
Greg Abbott got 53% of the Hispanic male vote. Doesn't this kill the argument for amnesty from the rhinos?
I think that lots of mainstream myths got shattered with this election. We were told that if Dan Patrick and Ken Paxton were the Republican nominees for Lieutenant Governor and Attorney General, it would turn Texas blue. That didn't work out so much. We were told that this election was a referendum on women's health care issues, which means killing babies. And so they got themselves the referendum poster child for women's health care issues, which is really killing babies. And 54% of women voted for Greg Abbott. So what did they say? So confuse the message. And the same thing's true with the Hispanic vote. We were told that there is no way that the Republican Party was doomed if you had this ticket of Greg Abbott and Dan Patrick and Ken Paxton and Glenn Hager and go down the line of all these guys. Oh, it was doomed. Hispanics would be turning out in droves to kick out these law and order, board of security conservatives. Oops. 10 Democratic districts, heavily Hispanic districts, counties, flipped from D to R. Oops. 50-some% of Hispanic males voted for, not just for Abbott, but for all these guys. Oops. That's problems for them.
Do you think Greg Abbott would sign the conservative reforms that we need in Texas? Do you think Texas will balance the budget in the next legislative session and pay off some of the debt that the state of Texas has?
I think the worst thing that has happened with the inevitability storyline around Greg Abbott has been most folks kind of have this, okay, we know he was predestined to be governor and that he was absolutely going to be governor and there's no way around it, he was going to be governor. So what does he stand? But he doesn't stand for anything. Well, the irony has been that Greg Abbott's campaign has put forward more policy white papers than any gubernatorial campaign I think I've ever seen anywhere in the country. Strong language, practical, down into nuts and bolts kind of stuff. So I am very comfortable with the idea that Greg Abbott is going to be signing the good stuff that gets to him. Now, the liability with Greg Abbott's personality type is, the guy has spent a lot of his career putting on a black robe and sitting on a bench and waiting to see what stupid arguments and what good arguments came to him, which judges are not supposed to be activists. And so that's kind of ingrained in him. So how active this mindset will be kind of remains to be seen. But I am supremely confident that if we can have the House and the Senate, well, it goes the other direction. The Senate and the House passing good legislation. The Senate's going to pass good legislation. The question mark is on the House. I am confident good legislation gets signed by Greg Abbott. You asked then about debt
Budget.
or the balanced budget. The budget's going to be balanced. In Texas, the budget is always balanced. When the fish says to you, "Look how well I swim, pat me on the back," I want that to be the first fish you eat. Okay? When a state rep or a state senator or any other, divine godlike being comes before you and says, "Well, we balanced the budget this year," you go, "Whoop-de-freaking-do, shut up and go away." Because constitutionally, they have to balance the budget. It is impossible to not balance the budget because we don't have a Xerox machine that pumps out $20 bills. Okay? So the budget's always balanced. Now, how they balance the budget, that's the question you and I should be asking. Are they going to balance the budget honestly or dishonestly? Up until now, we've mostly balanced the budget dishonestly. Okay. So our questions be not did you balance the budget, but are they going to balance the budget honestly? That is the question that Joanne Fleming does a better job of answering than I do. And that's the question where if Joanne Fleming thinks they might be tempting to do something dishonest, I'm going to be outside of that zip code because she's going to be, just shooting people indiscriminately at that point, I think. So, but you can look at the, the fund games they play and switching dollars here and there. Greg Abbott has certainly made a very persuasive case that needs to stop immediately. Dan Patrick says it needs to stop immediately. Jay Nelson, that needs to stop immediately, like Senate Finance Chair. The House has kind of done, the current House leadership has been, oh, well, yeah, then they need to go back to the cocktail room at the country club and, regroup. Less optimism on that. Getting rid of the debt, the sad reality is that there is a fair amount of debt that the legislature has imposed. Most of the debt in Texas we've done to ourselves, thank you very much. Hopefully, like some of the transportation debt and stuff like that, we can start to see addressed. That's only going to be addressed if you honestly balance the budget. So now you've got this money that you can apply towards paying down debt. Same way, you got a big credit card bill and you spend your money in the month regularly, you can buy down the credit card bill. So that's, that is part of honestly balancing the budget. I'd suggest you also, though, this is where you and I need to start having a very uncomfortable conversation with the dim-witted moron in the mirror about, why didn't I vote in that election last May, for the school debt, for the city debt, for the county debt, for the hospital district debt, for the everybody else's debt. Why did I go along with that constitutional amendment doing debt? We need to have those conversations before it gets even further out of control. And 2/3 of Texas debt is held locally. There's not a whole lot your state legislature can do about 2%, or excuse me, about 98% of us not showing up, for the school bond election. Not much they can do about that. Or maybe there is. One reform that I've advocated for a while, we currently require under state law, every school district in the state can charterize itself. It can kind of, it can escape all of the, or a lot of the mandates, a lot of the onerous, burdensome regulations, all from the TEA. Now, you don't hear this from your school district folks, do you? They don't say they have already an easy way out of all the rules. Well, they don't tell you because they advocate for the rules, number one. Number two, though, they've made it so it's a little, even if you have some uppity superintendent or school board who might want to do it, they put into state law back in the early 1990s a requirement that to charterize your school district, where you escape the state rules and regs, you have to have a 25% voter turnout in an election to do it. That is the only place in state law where we require a voter turnout for anything. If three people showed up for governor, for the gubernatorial election, those three people decide who the governor is for the whole state of Texas. That's the state of the law, except for escaping regulations. Okay, so that exists. So that's already in law. I would ping all debt issuance in the state of Texas to that section of code. And I would say that if you are a school that wants to do debt, that's fine. That's great. Knock yourself out. A few people, in Tyler want to have a lot of school debt. That is fantastic. You got to have 25% turnout there. And now you really do get closer to everyone in Tyler agreeing with a whole lot more debt. Okay, that's fine. And if you people want to do it yourselves, that's your business, not mine. That's the kind of reform that the legislature could do to address future debt.
I know we've talked about this, but I do ask all the questions. How can we best influence the speaker's race?
Phone calls, phone calls, phone calls. Letters, letters, letters. Big cheap tablet with a crayon is the best way to communicate with the state.
Any
No
news?
offense, Mr. Safer.
Any
You can use
news?
a ballpoint pen on your big cheap tablets, Mr. Safer.
Any news concerning firearms?
My firearms? No, I'm kidding. My wife didn't tell me about a break-in last night. May have been a discharge at the house I'm not aware of. I suspect that we see movement on new firearm legislation in this session. 2 days ago, Greg Abbott said that if the legislature passed some form of open carry, he would support it, that he would sign it into law. He's been very early position took and reaffirmed it. I think that you're going to see another go at the campus carry issue. It just boggles my mind that when we've got so many that you look at where violence is occurring, it's occurring almost exclusively in gun-free zones. And that makes sense.
That's right.
If you want to go do something bad, you go where you have a greater chance of no one stopping you. It's a good self-instinct kind of thing. So I think that's where it boggles my mind that the Texas House has continued to be obstructionist on that issue. But again, I think with Greg Abbott as governor, I think we see that move forward.
What is the date of the first 2015 session of the Texas Legislature?
Tuesday, January the 13th, 12 noon is when they will get started. Just to understand a little bit of the process, the first day of every legislative session, the first day, the Texas House is presided over by the Secretary of State. Okay, the Secretary of State, who's an appointee of the governor, presides over the Texas House. Usually it's done by acclamation, the adoption of the rules of the previous session for the purpose of beginning business. So she has everyone raise their right hand and everyone's little minions standing around all, hey daddy, and all that kind of stuff. That's fun. Then they do this kind of vote of acclamation for the rules, and then they get into the speakership vote. It is possible this time around the speakership might be the second vote. Or third vote, if there is some maneuver done to change the temporary rules of the Texas House in advance of the speakership vote, and that's something we may know in advance, or at 12:02 p.m. Mr. Schaefer may be sitting there going, "What did he just say?" Or maybe it's Mr. Schaefer who's going to be saying, I don't know. So there's that kind of thing that can go on. But it's at 12 noon, so if you're interested in observing your 150 divine godlike, demigod-like figures in the Texas House, the godlike figures in the Senate, the demigod-like figures are in the House, then I would suggest being at the Texas Capitol a little on the early side if you want to get there to watch that. They have precious little gallery seating for the public where we can look down upon them and smirk.
When and where will your Texas Tuesday briefings be held, and will they be broadcast live?
The briefings will be held at, because we all only do upscale, we're going to do the La Quinta conference room that is there on the southeast corner of kind of the Capitol complex. That might mean people are going to be really friendly with each other in there, trying to not sure how many the forecast will be there. Whether we broadcast them or not is still an open question. It's just technically and other things. Each one of our groups are small groups, so we manpower, resources, that kind of thing. But that is something we're discussing, or at least making a general video available of the procedures briefing. That will kind of be the same every week, and the rules briefing and that sort of thing. Make that sort of thing available, just so whenever folks come to town in advance, they can check that to see how does this process work.